Here we are today. We have a guest who actually reached out to us on Facebook, and her story sounded so interesting. And she's been listening to our podcast. That as soon as we even heard like a tiny sliver of what her story was, we really wanted to bring her on and hear it. So please welcome Melissa Porter.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
We're happy to have you.
We're very happy to have you. So why don't we just start out? We wanted to ask you just about your story and how you came to find us, and what you would like to tell us about adoption and your relation to it.
Sure. So, gosh, I have several overlapping connections to adoption, I would say. And the past few years, I've just kind of been soaking up everything adoption related. So I came across your podcast, really loved it. The Primal Wound is one of my go-to books. So I really got suckered right into the podcast. I have like 4 copies of the book at all times. I feel like it's a great communicator. So depending on who I'm in communication with, I've got various books started. If I was in contact with this person, what would I want them to know about how I relate to this book? Or when it comes to, adoptive side versus a biological side versus extended family or friends, I feel like I highlight depending on who I think my intended audience will be, and then I give them that book. So
that's a great idea.
I know that actually is like, we've had the same experience where we want to tell everybody, like, I got to send this to this person.
Yes, absolutely. So I am an adoptee myself. I was adopted at birth, or shortly thereafter. I was about 6 weeks old. And I have 2 siblings that were adopted into the same household. And they are 2 biological sisters that were adopted by my adoptive parents. So I have had kind of adoption and contact on both sides of that, growing up with adopted siblings, growing up adopted myself. And years
Were they
later,
older
now,
or younger than you?
They're younger. So I was
Okay.
3, and when they were adopted, they were 1 and 2 years old. They were living with their maternal grandmother after their mother was unable to care for them. So they were living there. And an additional twist, which kind of becomes relevant recently, is after we adopted both of them, there was a third child that was also born, but my adoptive parents didn't feel like they could take on another child at that point. So the social worker that was involved in their adoption actually adopted the third little girl.
Wow.
Wow.
And sadly, we found out that she passed away this week. So it's been
The
it's been
social
very
worker
present
or
for me.
the
The
child?
daughter.
Oh.
Yeah, the daughter. Yeah.
So
There had been some
sorry.
addiction
that's-
issues that we kind of knew about. So my adopted sisters had stayed close to her throughout their whole lives. And when we were real young, our parents would get us together. So I grew up during childhood with her as like an extended sister, and she had 4 or 3 other sisters. So we all grew up together. In adulthood, we drifted. My 2 sisters stayed very close to her. The 3 of them were like 3 peas in a pod all the time. So she had some addiction issues, and then there's a family history of mental illness and different things. But I didn't realize until after the funeral and talking with her mom that she'd really been struggling with some adoption related stuff. And I wish I had known. I don't have a magic wand, but I wish I had known that she was struggling so much.
Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear that. I know so many people do, right? And this is why we're doing these conversations. And
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
So you were adopted. And what state were you adopted in? And were you told early on? And
Yes. So I was adopted in New York, and I always knew. I don't remember a time that I didn't know I was adopted. We had the Chosen Baby book. It's a pretty well-known one of the adoption books. It was always on the shelf. So yeah, I don't remember a time that I didn't know. It was openly talked about. Looking back now, none of us knew what that meant to talk about it. It wasn't a secret. It wasn't shameful.
Yeah.
But we really didn't talk about it either. It was just a fact. It was just there. It was just our reality. Growing up, I looked a lot like my adopted dad. So ironically, he would go into parent-teacher conferences, and they would say, "We know exactly who you are. You're Melissa's dad." And he'd say, "That's really funny because Melissa's adopted." There's no reason
so
that
interesting.
you would think that. Yeah. It became a family joke. My mom would always say to him, like, "What were you up to 9 months before June of 1984? Like, what was going on?" But yeah, so I grew up very close. I always knew that I was born. My birth certificate said there's a city that's north of, I live in the Albany, New York area, the capital region, and the city that I was born was right on there. And I always knew that we knew that the two younger girls knew they were adopted. It was just our normal way of life. We didn't know anything different.
Did you feel any kind of, I don't know, some sort of like longing to know where you were from?
There were times when I did. I can remember, like in particular, I don't know why this one stands out so much, but I remember in 5th grade on the day of my birthday, I remember watching the clock tick closer and closer to 11 a.m. because I knew I had been born at 11. And I just remembered that year for some reason really sticking out. And I said to my mom, my adoptive mom, I wonder if anyone else out there is thinking about me today. And she said, well, I sure hope so, which was kind of a weird response, but I didn't think too much of it at the time. It wasn't brought up a lot. And I did struggle a lot as a teen. I struggled to feel like I didn't belong anywhere. I hopped group to group. I was a chameleon. I became whatever group would take me at that time.
Seems to be a recurring theme among adoptees.
Yes. Yeah. But if you had asked me then, and actually I had a therapist then, when I was about 14, 15, I was a cutter and my parents sent me to a therapist. They never asked. I don't even think on any of the intake paperwork that they even identified I was adopted, but they certainly asked, like, why are you so upset? And it was like, I don't know. It just like something doesn't feel right. I'm just fundamentally unhappy at my core. And I remember, a best friend saying, like, you just need some ice cream. Like, I don't think that's it. I don't think that's going to fix it, but
that's such a theme we were hearing so much about. Like, I mean, I had the same as you, where I felt really fine about my adoption. But then you look back and you think I had all these things bubbling up in issues, and
yes, exactly.
No one linked these things.
Right. And if you had asked me at any point up until probably like 3 years ago, I would have said, no, I'm happy I was adopted. I'm like, everything's, and I still am. But there's also all of these other pieces now that I never knew were there.
You were in the fog, so to speak.
Yes, very much so. Yes. Yeah. And there was a bit of a breakthrough when I was probably about 25. I was living in Boston with my fiance and I was just home for a weekend. And I remember saying to my parents, I always thought when I turned 18, there would just be this magical file that opened up and it'd be like, here you go. And my dad looked at me and said, oh, did you want that information? I was like, does it exist somewhere? And they had a folder of information that they said, well, you never talked about it. You never asked. So we didn't want to give you something that you didn't, well, like they just didn't think it was on my radar. Yeah. Which goes to, like I said, it was never a secret. It was never shameful, but obviously we never talked about it. It just, and didn't, it had the typical non-identifying information, but, I found out a lot of pieces that day to my story and I didn't start search. That was pretty hard for me that day to get those pieces.
Oh, yeah.
And it was probably I didn't start searching until my daughter was born, a couple of years after my daughter was born, which again, very typical. Like a lot of the stories when I hear some of your guests on, it's the same type of age and life stage when people start to get curious and start looking for those answers.
Oh yeah. Sarah and I have talked to several people recently who haven't even been on. And it's the same exact thing. Having your child is like, boom. Huge.
Yeah, like first human being in the world that was actually related to me in some way that I knew. Changes things. There's not even words for it. It just changes things.
Yeah.
And I think it also made me wonder, now my adoptive parents, they couldn't have children. So they don't have any biological kids, just the 3 that they adopted. And before my daughter was born, my husband has another daughter who's a couple of years older. I've been in her life since she was about 6 months old. And they, people say you don't love your bio kids any differently than you do your other kids. And I always thought, well, my parents don't know that because they've never had that. They have nothing to compare it to. So I guess I was lucky. They didn't have anything to compare it to. But there's something just so different about having that blood relative. And maybe non-adoptees really don't feel that difference. Maybe they really don't know what we're talking about when we say it, but to have that first human being in the world that you can see yourself in is just life-changing, I think.
It truly is.
I think you struck on a chord there. We've never said that, but I think that's a good way to look at it, that if you're not adopted, you wouldn't know you're missing that.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That's interesting.
Right. Yeah.
So you began the search?
I did. So I got information, like I said, when I was 25, that paperwork told me, it gave me, you know, approximate ages of my grandparents who were living and mom. And I had, at the time that I was given up for adoption, I had 2 older brothers and an older sister on mom's side. So I was the 4th born, and the paperwork essentially said that there were some marital issues between mom and her husband. And during a period when he was away, he had some legal challenges, and he was away from the house for a period, that she had an affair with someone else, and I was the outcome of that. And that they had really tried to work on the relationship, but that at the end of the day, they had figured that it would just be better for everyone's kind of emotional well-being and the marital situation if I was placed for adoption. So it was specified in the papers that, you know, they wanted a family that was really going to value education, and they wanted a good Catholic family because they were a Catholic family. But yeah, so I really only had background on mom's side.
And your siblings
based on all that.
Together, they were still together.
They were.
Wow.
Yep. So, which it's different to see that on paper than, you know, I've got the full story now, but not only that, but I also in the paper, I was born at home. I wasn't born at a hospital. I was born at home in the bathtub. You know, 4th baby comes along, born at home in the bathtub, and first 3 kids are kept, but 4th isn't. So like, that's like the impact of when I was 25, I was like, really, this is my story? Because you guys know there's the whole ghost kingdom that we create for ourselves.
Yes.
And I was probably a princess, or I was probably a twin, or I was probably something.
Yeah.
Something.
Not the 4th kid given up.
Right.
That was
right.
not right. That isn't.
Yeah.
Wow.
So yeah.
So when you started this search, were you already a therapist?
I was, yes.
And because you specialized in adoption, right? Or you had, or
I am starting to specialize in
trauma?
Adoption now. Yes. Trauma has always been my thing. Attachment theory has always been my thing. I decided when I was 16 that I was going to be a psychologist, and I never looked back. Most of my work, and I don't know how this fits into adoption, I'm sure it does in some way, but I work with a lot of criminals. I work with offender populations. So I work with the worst of the worst. And I don't know why. I don't know. I want to understand what makes someone behave in those ways. And I'm sure that's linked in somehow to attachment and my understanding of all of that trauma. But so yeah, that's always been my thing since I was a teen, probably trying to figure it all out on my own at that point.
Wow.
Yep.
So when you did the search, what happened along the way? Like, who did you meet and what went on there?
My search was uncharacteristically short. I took, just kind of on a whim, I took an ancestry test, and I got the result. I'll never forget that I got the results back on September 11th because it was September 11th. So I got my results back on September 11th of 2018. And I happened to match to a couple of cousins, I think second cousins, first, like once removed, who were really into genealogy. And like within an hour of me getting those results, we were on the phone talking, and they were helping me put those pieces together. They actually connected me. They said, upload the information from Ancestry to this other site, which I did, because they knew that another one of their close relatives was on that site, and that ended up being my aunt, so my mother's sister. And I just reached out and said, hey, we've got a close match. And she emailed me back and said, we sure do. When can we get on a phone and talk to each other? And that was kind of it. I was really like, I started panicking, and all the feelings leading up to this phone call. And I didn't know where to start. I said, I don't know if you know who I am. I don't know if you want to hear from me. I don't know if anybody wants to hear from me. I started rambling.
Yeah.
And she said, June 1st, 1984, your name was Ryan, and I was one of the first to hold you. And just from there, like she had known, she could fill in some pieces about my grandma, who I guess had talked about me all over, through the years until she passed away. So I have been extremely fortunate in how well that reunion was really received by everyone.
Including your birth mother.
Yes. So it was so my aunt that I connected with lives in Florida now. She moved down there a number of years ago with her father, my grandfather. And the day that I reached out and spoke to my aunt, my sister and my bio mom had actually driven down to Florida to move in with my aunt. And as my aunt and I are having this conversation, they're pulling into her driveway. So, and my aunt is very big on everything happens the way it's meant to happen and all the signs. And she was like, this is weird. It's all happening. So, mom was a little slower to come around. She had, as is very common, a lot going on, like a lot of thoughts, a lot of feelings all coming up. So I wrote her a letter and I asked my aunt to give it to her, and she held on to that. And with her, it was a very slow start. First, she would kind of linger in the background when I would be like, my sister and my brother, like if they were on my Facebook, they'd say like, oh, do you want to see any pictures? And she'd be like, no. But she'd kind of look, but not. And then, after a month or so, she friended me on Facebook. And then
did she have a lot of guilt
after that? I think so. And I never thought I wanted to know them. I thought I would do a drive-by and see if anyone was there and just see what they looked like. I really had no interest.
I called a drive-by.
Yes. Yeah.
Just dabble.
Mm-hmm. And I really, after getting that information when I was 25 and realizing I had these siblings, like, why would they want to know me? Like, why would they want to know me? I probably messed up their happy family, right? And that's not the case. So my three siblings that were already born when I was born, they were not all born to her husband. So she had the two older ones she had before she met him, and he had adopted them. And then they had a son together. And then I came along, and after I was adopted 3 years later, they had another little girl. So her, and her too, I was like, she never knew. Why would she want anything to do with me? She doesn't know.
And she was not given up for adoption.
Right. She was not.
And did they stay together for all those years?
So I was wondering.
They did not. So my sister was born 3 years after me. And then there was a period of time when they were separated. And then they ultimately remarried later on and then separated again. And he passed away in 2002, which I think and I had already gotten some of those pieces before I reached out to the family. I'm not sure that I would have if he was still living. I wouldn't have wanted to. I know a lot of adoptees feel like it's their right to kind of seek their answers. And I don't know. I never felt that. I didn't feel like my getting answers was worth really potentially doing damage to other people. And I didn't know if my siblings knew about me. I didn't know if their marriage had worked out. I didn't know any of those things. So I don't know what I would have done if they were still together, but I do think I would have approached it pretty differently.
What about your siblings? Do they remember you being born and what happened to you, or your mom being pregnant and that whole situation?
So my brother didn't spend a lot of his childhood living with her. He actually lived with our maternal grandparents for most of his upbringing. And they're not sure how much they remember her being pregnant or me being born, but I was always talked about. Like they were told that I was their sister. I've learned, there was a Christmas ornament on the tree every year with my name on it. I was very present. My grandmother talked about me. My oldest brother
Wow.
does not have a recollection of any of it, which he's like, how did I not know? Because he was 5 or 6 at the time. And he said, but come to think about it, everybody always talked about Ryan. He's like, and I always just thought it was some guy. So it's possible, he probably did hear and just didn't put the pieces together. But
it's so interesting that
my sisters always knew
that they talked about you and had a ornament. And it kind of begs the question, well, then why did they give you up for adoption? It's interesting.
Right. It was painful for the father, right? To look at you, I guess.
Yeah. Yep.
The reminder,
that was a big piece of
their
it.
father. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And what about your birth father?
So I got his name and I did a lot. But I did some digging myself before I got the name. I was very hesitant to ask her. She was, because of that very slow to warm up process, I didn't want to go searching, like, give me a name now. I didn't want to scare her away. So I was doing a lot of tree building on Ancestry myself, which it's actually really funny there because I kept getting so close, like with it, second cousins, first cousins, but just couldn't figure out where is the link, where is this? And it's because my biological father's father, so my grandfather, was orphaned himself. He was left in an institution as a baby, and he had a name. He was given the name and he kept that name, but he never had any connection to the family. He didn't know where he came from. So through my searching, I've actually solved like 2 generations of mystery of where this
for other people
from.
Yeah.
Wow. And I found so his mother had gotten pregnant very young. So my great grandmother had gotten pregnant very young by the family chauffeur and had been quickly married off to someone else in the meantime. So she ended up having the baby, and he was never adopted. He grew up in an orphanage and never had any other family. And I think there was some trauma there that was passed down.
Can imagine.
But I ended up finding, so my great grandmother, her daughter, so my grandfather's half sister. And she said, on my mother's deathbed, she told us that we had a brother. And she's like, but we had no idea where to start. We didn't know anything about any of it. So I helped them solve that mystery.
That's incredible.
Yeah, it was really cool.
It's that tenacious adopted person's like
private investigator.
Private investigating.
Yes.
It's another thing we all seem to share.
Yeah.
And that chauffeur, that Italian chauffeur, actually ended up, I'm trying to think of what the connection is because I always forget what it is, but his sister, I want to say, or his niece married into my adopted family.
Oh,
so
my goodness.
My grandmother, who I was very close to, her brother's wife was like somehow related to that family. So it's like a couple of generations away, and it's crazy. Weird because I grew up knowing I was French and Irish, which is what mom's side was. And I had no background on what dad's side would have been. But adopted, mom's side was Italian and dad's side was English and German and a whole bunch of stuff. And I never took to that. I always made this like conglomerate of I'm French and Irish and Italian. And that's what I am. That's what my bio dad's side ends up being, 100% Italian. So it's very weird how it all works out.
That's really
You're from the upstate New York region, right?
Yes.
Maybe we're related back there somehow because I'm from that area too. And I'm Irish and English and
Yeah.
So did you find him then?
I have found bio dad. I have not met him. He has 3 other kids, and I've met all 3 of them. And we're fine. There's no animosity there. We're not super close. I was immediately taken back into bio mom's family. It's like I was never gone. My sisters and I are like best friends. My oldest brother instantly took on the role of protector that I know he would have taken on when we were kids. I've been to the family weddings. My aunt jokes, my grandfather passed away last month, and one of my uncles, and she's like, well, you're in now because you've had 2 funerals and a wedding. So you're official. But that is weird too, because in a lot of ways, I feel like if someone a couple of generations from now is doing an ancestry family tree, it's almost going to be like the adoption never happened. Like I really was very much absorbed right back into this family, right where everything was, I don't know. It's nice. I feel so welcome there. And I'm, out of all of the kids, I'm the one that looks the most like our mother. But I look very much like my siblings. And it's like they always say, like, it's so weird that you just like, you're okay with us, because we're like a hard family to just assimilate into. And I say, it feels like home. It just has always, from the first day, it just felt like home.
And how does your adopted parents, how do they feel about your family and your adopted sisters who you're close to with your new siblings?
So
old siblings.
My adopted parents want to be very supportive. They kind of immediately took to, so only one of my siblings lives in the same area as me. My one sister lives in Florida. The other one lives down in South Carolina. So I have one brother that's local, and my dad immediately said to him, like, well, if you get a sister out of this, I get a son out of this. And immediately like took him right under his wing. Wanted to buy tickets and hop on a plane and bring me down to meet my bio mom when we found that out. I think in some ways they want to be too involved at times, mostly my dad. And I think that's his way of coping with it. Like if he knows what's going on at all times, then he can kind of have a finger on the pulse of where everything's going.
Yeah.
And I've needed to put some separation there. Mom talks about it less, and I'm sure it's very difficult for her. November has become a real month of advocacy for me on social media. I blog and I post articles and I share different stories that I find. I make it really all about adoption awareness. And I did a story on my blog last year that was kind of like a letter to my adopted mom. And it was kind of taken from bits and pieces of other versions that people, I was like, these are the pieces that resonate with me. And she's not a very touchy-feely emotional person. So, I sent it to her by email and I said, let me know if you're okay with me posting this, because it's no secret that you're my adopted mom. So I want to make sure you're good with this first. And she said, I think I needed to read it just as much as you needed to write it, but we've never talked about it since. So I know it's hard for them.
Would you share that with us? We'd love to see that.
Yeah. I'll send you the link. I've got a couple. Yeah. Every year I say this month I'm going to post something every day for the 30 days of November. And every year I am just mentally done within the first week. It's just so hard. I have to make it less personal and more about like other people's stories and other research and things that I can share, because if I put too much of myself in, it's just draining. It's really draining.
So back to what Sarah asked you, did you met your biological dad?
I did not.
She hasn't yet.
Oh, you haven't.
Right.
Okay.
No,
You met
just the siblings.
Right. And why haven't you?
He really hasn't had much interest.
Did he know about you?
I believe the exact words he said to my brother were, yep, that sounds about right.
Oh.
So I think there had been, mom was navigating some of the same parties that he was. And I think there were rumors when she stopped showing up at the parties, but he never investigated that further. He did not. So my 3 siblings on his side, 2 of them are much older than me and 1 is much younger than me. So, and they're different moms. So his 2 oldest have one mom, then a period of time when he wasn't with anyone, and then he was with the mom of the younger one. And
so
he's not with either of them now.
He wasn't married when he was with your mom.
Correct.
When she had the affair. Okay.
Yeah. So he's mostly been alone for most of his adult life. And I think the kids mostly grew up with their moms. So I don't know that he really knows how to navigate the father role too much. So there was a period of time over the summer when he was really sick and in the hospital, and I got like this panicky, what if I never get to meet him? But now he's better, and that went away. So I don't know if I'll pursue it or how rigorously I'll pursue it. I think.
Does he live near you?
He does. Yep, he lives in the area. I think in my mind, if I had not been adopted, I don't think it would have been any different in regards to him. I don't think that I would have, if anything, I don't know, I would have been adopted by mom's partner. I think like her older kids were. I don't think he would have played a role in my life. So I don't know that I see it as a gap.
Because it's the same sort of with your siblings from him too.
Right.
Yeah, that's understandable.
Yeah.
Huh. That's really. And do you have one daughter now? And
yep, my daughter is 9 and my stepdaughter is 11.
Okay. Oh, that's right. You have a stepdaughter too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, and your sisters that you grew up with, how are they doing?
So they really got the double whammy themselves in terms of biology. So both on their bio mom and bio dad side, there's a lot of mental illness and a lot of addiction. And they were both born with probably some fetal alcohol effects. So they were a year and 2 years younger than me, but developmentally very, very much younger. So it's really awful. Sometimes I don't even remember that they're my siblings. I mean, I know like they are, we grew up together, but people will say, I said to my best friend, it's so nice to have sisters. I never had sisters. And she's like, yes, you did. You grew up with 2 of them. And it's like, oh, right. Yeah, I did. Oh, right. Because we didn't have that sibling bond. I was almost like in a parental role with them. I was not at the same level. So
are they able to function on their own? I mean, are they able to live independently?
So one of them lives independently, and her effects from the fetal alcohol are much more in terms of social vulnerabilities. So she'll befriend somebody she meets at the bus stop and move in with them type of thing. But made it through school, like, in terms of like intelligence level, it's there. It's just really some social vulnerabilities, doesn't really get it. When we were talking about the passing of her biological sister, she was like, but I don't get it. She was happy. She had a happy family and she had, 3 other siblings in that house and she was happy. Like, but there's just not that insight. I don't know.
Suicide?
I don't know. I don't know. It was sudden. And I know that she also had addiction issues. So I'm not sure. But yeah. So there's a lack of insight that my the one sister has. And the other one is honestly so ill between some pretty significant learning disabilities and mental illness that I don't think they can bring themselves to a level to really ponder what effect adoption had. I feel like there's so much other stuff that they just don't get it. They don't see it. I've tried to have those conversations and it doesn't really go anywhere.
And your one sister, she still lives with your parents then, with your adopted parents?
She does not.
Oh,
they're both independent.
They're both.
The younger one is in and out of hospitals quite often and in and out of rehabs quite often. And yeah.
Wow. That's sad.
It's really incredible. I mean, just the whole nature nurture discussion is such an interesting.
It really is.
It's just so many layers to it.
And you have so many facets in it. I mean, in every family, it's fascinating.
And my bio family is no stranger to addiction issues themselves. I've got some of that on both sides also.
Me too. Yeah.
And so my adopted parents will often be like they just think like, look at the 3 of us. And they're like, how? Like, how? Is it nature? Is it nurture? Is it like, what is it? Obviously, well, we can't separate that out. Gosh, if we ever could, I'd be out of a job anyway. But.
I have a question circling back to the genealogy research that you did and finding out about your birth father and his father. Did you share that information with your siblings? And
yeah, I've started to. I've shared some of it with my younger sister. I've shared a lot of it with so my uncle, my grandfather grew up in the Capital Region, and he got married and he had 2 boys, one of them being my father. And then he moved down to Florida. He kind of abandoned his family here in New York and went down to Florida and started all over again, and remarried, had another son. And that son I connected with through Ancestry. So even though my bio dad has no connection to this brother of his, I've been able to speak with him and fill in some of those blanks together, which has been interesting. And on my adopted side, my dad grew up in Albany, and so did his brother. And his brother remembers my grandfather. He remembers him. It just, they call it Smallbany. And I said, did you ever know so-and-so? And he's like, well, yeah, I mean, he used to be around here. He had an auto mechanics garage. And he's like, but that's before, he totally up and left his partner and, forgot all about the business and went down to Florida instead. It's like, wow, you really do know him. So
I think
there's been so many connections that I've found along the way.
I think about your grandfather, because growing up in an orphanage, I mean, I'm sure the trauma for him, even just to be a healthy dad, would be, who knows what he went through back in that era.
And of course, no tools, and men weren't supposed to deal with those kinds of feelings and thoughts. And
absolutely.
whole different world.
I've been saying that I want to put a packet of information together and give it to bio dad, just so he has that history. I keep saying I'm going to do it. I was going to do it for Father's Day. And what month are we in? Because Father's Day was in June.
It's a lot.
Maybe for Christmas. I don't know.
Or maybe that could be part of your adoption awareness thing in November.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely.
Makes it.
Yeah.
And does this all help, like when you're doing your work that you do with helping criminals or learning about criminals? And I'm not sure what aspect you do that, but how do you see them understanding a little bit different? And
so depends on the role. Sometimes it does. Sometimes I'm doing court evals, trying to understand, someone's state of mind. Yes, that helps. Sometimes it gets in the way because sometimes my task is this person who is now 83 years old safe to return to their community? And I'm like, but when they were 6, they were adopted. And I'm like, let's talk about them. They're like, that's like, yes, important to him as a person, but not important today in terms of the decision that we're being tasked with, type of thing. So yes.
I'm curious about if you've noticed, because I heard a statistic about suicide, that adoptees are 4 times more likely to commit suicide, which I just find staggering.
We just had a guest tell us this. And
Yes. So is there a portion of, is that a significant statistic with offenders? Have you found, or do you know, has anybody done any of that kind of research?
There's no consistent research. So one of the biggest problems with adoption research is that there's no consistent definitions for anything. So when we're talking about, 1 in 4 adoptees, is that anyone who's ever touched the adoption system? Is that including foster children who may spend years and years in the same house but are never formally adopted? Is that infant adoption? Is that international infant adoption? And nobody's doing the kind of research to standardize that. So that's what makes it really tricky. Like if I look at my offender population, and I couldn't even begin to give a number, but a big chunk has disruption in their childhoods, whether that's being shuffled from, mom to grandma to aunt to cousin, or whether that's a formal touch of the system, foster care, adoption. But that disruption is definitely seen in a huge chunk of their histories. Yes.
I was wondering that because Sarah and I at the beginning, when we were reading, as you have, the Primal Wound, and she quotes the different statistics about juvenile hall, and I was wondering how much of that's foster care, how much of it is babies who are adopted or someone adopted at 5, or, because it would be hard to quantify that. I mean, I'm not even sure how they would do it, but we're curious about this because we hear so many different statistics on it, and just the suicide rate was staggering to us. We were shocked by that.
Yes. I posted something on my social media the other day, and I can't remember the numbers, but it was like, X percentage of serial killers were adopted or something like that. And my dad commented like, wow, can't wait for our next family reunion. But even like any type, it's not just suicide. It's all these, I don't know if you've heard of ACEs, but they're adverse childhood experiences. It's a list of experiences that are linked with difficulties later on. And things like trauma in history in childhood, whether it's foster care or whether it's adoption or whether it's a whole list of, it could be medical trauma, but traumas as kids is seen across the board later when people are having troubles.
Yeah. I can raise my hand to attest that I am a perfect example of that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well,
I could talk forever about this. It's just, and pick your brain.
I know, me too. I'm like, what else?
With your work and the work you're doing. And,
it's one thing that's interesting, and I don't know where, I mean, it fits in a lot of places, but as I've done all of my training, I've been very science-based. I was watching one of your earlier podcast when you guys were both telling your stories, and you were talking about, did that sound hokey or did that sound hokey? And just in terms of my profession, I try to stay away from hokey, right? That's right for my work. And this has really opened me up to a whole new level in terms of energies and how we store trauma and what all of that means. And in my work with my own clinician, I found that EFT, I don't know how familiar you are with that, but we
both are,
emotional freedom technique and the tapping. I had one session and it like drastically changed things for me. So it's definitely opened me up. And when I was trying to get information about when I was first born, like that first period, I don't like my birthday. And I know that's not uncommon, but I've always had a thing with the whole month of June, the whole month. And I don't know why. I like never knew why. It was just like, it's my birth month. Not that I celebrated it all month. It was just the whole month had some sort of meaning. And in talking with my bio mom, she told me that every day for 30 days until she had to sign those final papers, she visited me. And I don't, other family members have said that they're not sure that happened or whatever. But she's able to tell me what I looked like and how that changed over 30 days. So I was born with a huge dark head of hair. And by the time my adopted parents adopted me, I was bald. So she was able to say like, oh no, you were born with this head of dark hair and it like thinned out over the first month. And then you were like bald. And she also,
did she have pictures of you?
She didn't. Not that I've seen, although she's been fairly transient over the years, living different places. So I don't know if they would have been maintained. But she did. I said, well, were there any songs that you ever sang me? Because I saw a post somewhere about people sharing this. And she talked about Love Me Tender by Elvis. And I thought, well, that does nothing for me because I've never, not that I dislike Elvis. It's just never been anything that really got me. Like it wasn't one of my favorites. And then I was on another website people were talking about, and they have these music boxes that you can have made with songs that are early lullabies. And I turned that song into a lullaby and that got me. So it's not Elvis singing it and it's not like a recording of him, but if it's just the melody, that gets me. So in terms of like storing that energy and storing those early emotional experiences without, pre-verbal, so without having any of those words, I'm a believer in the hokey now.
Yeah. We are too. We've had because there's just those deep feelings, like the sixth sense of something, and you can't. We try to explain it to others. To ourselves, we understand it. Sarah and I talk and we are like, I get it. But, you talk to outside people about it and they're kind of like, okay, with the eye roll, absolutely. Or you can kind of see them going, But
I had a friend who she was not adopted. But her mother, she was a late pregnancy that they unplanned. And her mother sat every single day of her pregnancy on the base in the stairs down to the basement in the dark, sobbing about being pregnant. and how that affected my friend and growing up and the way it manifested and later in life is so interesting.
Yeah, I believe that.
Yeah.
Yes. I found out that in conversations with BioMom, she had wanted to keep me. And I do think that I would love to do research on the different outcomes for people that had that in utero experience versus the one that you're describing where they're upset all the time. She had planned to, and that's kind of her story, but she had really hoped that I'd be able to stay. And when it became clear I couldn't, it was after I was born and I was clearly not preterm, the joke was up. So, but that tells me that for 9 months, I did have that, I didn't grow up with the tears and the sobbing and the feelings that go along with that.
That makes me sad actually too, because how much pressure she might've had to put you up for adoption and not wanting to.
Yes.
And God, it would be slow to get to know you if you're her, because to put that away, that pain is a lot.
We have talked about it. I don't dig. I'm kind of just happy to have her as a presence in my life, and we have a good relationship. I moved from the capital region, so I'm about an hour away now, and she'll come spend the weekend at my house, and she's the third grandma to my daughter. And, we're picking up just like I am with the other members. So it's once we got over that initial hump, which I totally understand on both sides. No, we're in a really good place.
And this is neat for your daughter. Your daughter has this big extended family, like that's really welcoming. That's really cool.
Yes.
That's so great.
Her best friend is my sister's daughter down in Myrtle Beach. They FaceTime each other. They're on the phone for hours every day. And me and my sister are just texting in the background, like, did you just hear them? They're like real cousins. We're like, well, they are real cousins, but they're, you know what I mean? So it's been great.
That's so great. I'm so this is a great story. Thank you so much for sharing and
thank you for having me
giving us the time and being so just open and honest about everything.
Yeah, really. It's been really
the only way to be with this stuff. I have found
really
so many people reach out to me because I am open and honest on my social media platforms. And when they themselves are struggling or they have a teenager that's coming, 12, 13, and all of a sudden that adoption they always seemed okay with, or maybe not so much. I want people to know that there are resources. There's no adoption's not going anywhere. And for good reasons oftentimes, but we can do it better so that the lasting effects aren't as breaking. I see so many people broken from this, and they don't have to stay broken.
Yeah. Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah, that's a great message.
That's what we're hoping to do. So we love having you here to help us just even have these conversations. It's wonderful.
It's nice to when you're out of the fog and you can speak to that. It's a great message. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
This has been amazing.
Yeah.
And we'll keep in touch. Definitely.
Yeah,
Thank
for sure.
you.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Bye, Melissa.
Bye, Melissa.
Bye.